I'm Sarah. I was 45 when the door closed on the life I thought I knew, and I still remember the small sounds of that night. The faucet's steady drip, the whisper of the robe against tile, the hollow echo of his suitcase in the hallway. I sat on the bathroom floor and begged him to stay until my voice ran out of words. He stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand, and said calmly, "I want to separate." The words fell like flat glass. They cracked me, but they didn't cut clean. They left 1,000 jagged edges inside me. For 25 years, I built the steady parts of our life. He chased projects and promises, landscaping one summer, a contracting idea the next, while I held the steady job that paid the bills and held the benefits. I scheduled doctor visits, fielded calls from confused relatives about coverage, and learned to speak insurance speak at 2 a.m. so the kids could sleep. I carried the family's health plan the way some people carry groceries, carefully, without complaint, convinced it was just what love looked like. Turns out, for him, it was just what convenience looked like. You don't notice the pattern when you're in it. Birthdays were rescheduled for Billy's games, certificates were congratulated with shrug, and my wins were cataloged as, "That's nice, honey." Sophia's piano recitals got front row seats and flower bouquets. When the school recognized my scholarship, my father clapped 3 times and went back to the crossword. Those small omissions pile up until they shape a life. I learned the hard way that loyalty looks different in different hands. When he left with the casual arrogance of someone who thinks the world will rearrange itself in his favor. We filed for legal separation like adults. Forms signed, boxes moved. He moved into a small apartment with 2 boxes and the thrill of imagined freedom. Meanwhile, I went to work. Routine became an anchor. Under fluorescent office light, I was calm, efficient. The woman who could walk into a benefits meeting and recite deductibles without a single tremor. At home, I practiced the phrase I would one day mean, "I will be fine." The turning point came not with fireworks, but with an email. A new job, an unexpected title, and a benefits package that made me laugh in the car because it was too good and too absurd to be only practical. Family coverage with almost nothing out of pocket, dental vision, a tiny deductible that felt like a joke in the best possible way. I remember watching the office building's glass catch the late sun and feeling that brittle thing inside me loosen. For the first time in years, there was fresh air in my lungs. Here's the delicious little legal seam he never considered. We were separated, not divorced. He remained technically eligible to be on my insurance. It would cost me nothing to keep him there. Nothing. That was the moment a very small, very private plan found its shape. If I filed for divorce, $60 and a single form would erase him from my coverage. If I didn't, he could stay on the plan that had protected our family for decades. That quiet arithmetic felt like a pivot in the sky. When he called months later asking for proof of dependent status and a brittle apology that wanted me to accept his freedom as if it were a gift, I told him calmly that I'd keep him on the policy for a fee. Not because the coverage cost me anything, because it cost him. $400 a month, I said. The price of convenience, the price of his walkaway. He sputtered, annoyed, confused. "But Sarah, it cost you nothing." "Exactly," I said. Which is the point. I won't pretend it was noble. It was petty, precise, and delicious. I had sat on the bathroom floor and let the world feel very small and very cold. I had dried my own tears, paid the bills, and kept the kids' appointments. Now the balance shifted. Each month, his payment arrived like a small, private apology he could never say out loud. I booked a ticket to Spain with one of those payments, and when I clicked, confirm, I felt the same hot rush as when the weather vane finally turned and pointed away from the storm. I had begged him to stay once. Now he was paying me not to file for divorce. and the irony settled across me like a warm, vindicated cloak. In the weeks after I struck that deal, I started to notice a shift inside myself. The woman who once begged on the bathroom floor was slowly being replaced by someone sharper, steadier, and far less willing to be anyone's safety net for free. Mark had walked out without looking back, and now every month his money came in like an involuntary reminder that freedom isn't always free. $400 at a time, he was learning that. Still, I remember how fragile I felt when the separation was fresh. Nights stretched long and quiet. I'd hear the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen and feel like the whole world had gone still just to mock me. I'd scroll through old photos, wondering how a man I had loved for more than 2 decades could look me in the eye and say, "I want out," without even blinking. Have you ever sat staring at someone you thought was your forever, only to realize they'd already decided you were temporary? That was my reality. But then life started handing me small victories. My new job didn't just cover health insurance, it gave me a sense of worth I hadn't felt in years. My coworkers respected me, my boss trusted me, and for the first time, my skills weren't just keeping a family afloat, they were being valued in their own right. It felt good, better than good. It felt like justice. I'd spent years being told my career was secondary to his dreams, and yet when he walked away, it was my career that gave me the power to control the aftermath. Mark, meanwhile, was struggling. He'd underestimated how expensive life could be without me carrying the weight. His self-employment income was irregular, and now he had rent, utilities, groceries, all things I had managed for years while he barely noticed. When he realized that health insurance on the open market would cost him nearly twice what I was charging, he swallowed his pride and paid me every month. I didn't need to check my bank account to know when the transfer landed. The small spark of satisfaction in my chest told me before I even saw the numbers. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the control. For 25 years, I had lived in the shadow of his decisions, moving when he wanted, cutting back when his business dipped, adjusting when his whims shifted. Now, with a single $60 divorce form tucked in my desk drawer, I held the power. One signature, and his comfortable arrangement would vanish. That knowledge was intoxicating. Every time we spoke, he was careful, measured, almost deferential. It was as if he finally realized what it felt like to depend on me. Only now it came with consequences. I kept the arrangement simple. He sends the money, I keep him covered. No arguments, no excuses. If he was late, I reminded him once. If he dared to protest, I reminded him again that he was free to get his own insurance any time he wanted. He never did. That silence on the other end of the phone was proof enough. He hated it, but he needed me more than I needed him. And I loved every second of it. I didn't flaunt it to anyone. To the outside world, I was just Sarah, the woman finding her footing again after a long marriage ended. But inside, I savored the irony. The same man who once dismissed my tears and told me I'd adjust was now paying me month after month just so I wouldn't end the marriage officially. I stopped crying on the bathroom floor and started planning instead. New clothes, dinners out with friends, a long-awaited trip abroad. Spain was already on the horizon, paid for entirely by his guilt money. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel like the victim of his choices. Instead, I felt like the author of my own story. And the chapter I was writing now? It was one of quiet, calculated revenge. The first time I saw him after the separation, I almost laughed. Mark looked thinner, more worn down, as if the freedom he fought so hard for had come with a cost he hadn't calculated. He still tried to carry himself with the same confidence he'd always had, but there was a crack in the facade now. His eyes darted nervously, his voice a little too casual. It struck me then, He had no idea how obvious his dependence had become. We met at a coffee shop to go over some paperwork. I wore my best blazer, not for him, but for me. I wanted him to see the version of me that no longer begged on bathroom floors, the woman who stood tall because she had nothing left to lose. He fumbled with his papers, clearing his throat. You know, Sarah, this whole insurance thing, it's kind of ridiculous. You don't even pay for it. Why should I keep giving you $400? I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. Because it's cheaper than the alternative, I said calmly. His mouth opened, then closed again. He knew I was right. Have you ever watched someone try to hide the fact that they've lost? It's a fascinating thing. They shift in their chair, they fumble with excuses, they speak louder as if volume can rewrite reality. That was Mark in that moment. He hated that I had the upper hand, hated that I could end his comfort with the flick of a pen. But he also knew he couldn't do a thing about it. For the first time in our marriage, or rather in the aftermath of it, I had the leverage. I kept my tone even, professional. This is a business arrangement, Mark. You pay me and you stay covered. Don't like it? File for your own policy. You're free to walk away anytime. The words tasted sweet. He nodded stiffly, signing the papers without another word. That day I realized just how far the balance had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was in control. At home, I celebrated in small ways. I bought myself a bottle of good wine, the kind he always insisted was too expensive. I poured a glass, leaned back on the couch, and let the taste remind me of everything I had endured to get here. Every transfer he made into my account wasn't just money, it was validation. Proof that I had turned his rejection into my power. Over the months, I started to notice how his tone softened. Phone calls that used to carry a sharp edge now came with a forced politeness. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it. He never would have said that before. I knew it wasn't gratitude. It was survival. He couldn't risk irritating me, not when I held the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. His healthcare. The irony was delicious. For years, he had dismissed my career as just office work. Now that same career was the rope keeping him from drowning. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how poetic it was. He left me believing he was walking into freedom, but what he actually walked into was dependence. He had traded a marriage for a monthly bill, and the bill had my name on it. I stopped feeling bitter and started feeling something else, empowered. I wasn't waiting for closure from him anymore. I was writing my own. That night, as I closed my laptop and saw the notification for his latest transfer, I couldn't help but smile. He thought leaving me would break me. Instead, it made me stronger. And now, he was paying me to prove it. By the time fall rolled around, the arrangement felt almost natural. Every first of the month, like clockwork, $400 landed in my account. I started calling it freedom money, not because it made me rich, it didn't, but because of what it meant. Each deposit was a reminder that I no longer begged for scraps of love, no longer cried on the cold tiles of my bathroom floor, no longer lived at the mercy of his choices. I was steering my own ship now, and the irony was that he was the one funding the wind in my sails. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if he ever thought about it. Did he lie awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing how absurd it was? He had walked away from a marriage of 25 years, only to find himself tethered to me in a way he couldn't escape. Did it eat at him? Did it bruise his pride? I hoped it did. Because for me, the sting of betrayal had already turned into the fire of resolve, and that fire wasn't going out anytime soon. One evening, I saw him at the pharmacy. He was picking up a prescription, his shoulders slumped, his face tired and older than I remembered. When our eyes met, he gave me an awkward smile, like nothing had ever happened. "Hey, Sarah, he said softly. How's work? I tilted my head, holding his gaze without a single flinch. Work's great, I answered. Pays well, covers everything I need, and then some. His jaw tightened. He caught the double meaning instantly. He knew exactly what I was saying. I didn't need him. He needed me. And that truth hung between us heavier than any silence could. Have you ever seen someone realize they've lost every ounce of power over you? It's subtle. A flicker in the eyes, a shift in the posture. Words that used to cut suddenly lose their edge. That's what I saw in him. For years, Mark had called the shots, where we lived, how we spent, even when I could take time for myself. But here he was, in a fluorescent-lit pharmacy aisle, reduced to nothing more than a man paying me to keep him afloat. I left that night with my head high, the cool evening air brushing against my face like a quiet celebration. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to gloat. My victory wasn't loud. It was steady, calm, the heartbeat of someone who finally knows she's free. And yet, part of me wondered, how long would he keep it up? How many months before his pride became too heavy to bear? The thought didn't scare me anymore. Because whether he paid or walked away, I knew I'd be fine. Better than fine. When I got home, I opened my journal and wrote just one line. Sometimes revenge doesn't need fire or fury. Sometimes it's as quiet as a bank transfer. I closed the book, poured myself another glass of wine, and smiled. Let him believe he had left me behind. The truth was, he was still right here, reminded of me every 30 days, whether he liked it or not. Winter settled in, the kind of cold that bites through coats and creeps into your bones. But inside my little apartment, life felt warmer than it had in years. I decorated my living room with twinkling lights, lit candles that smelled like vanilla and cedar, and played my favorite old jazz records on repeat. Every corner of my space felt like mine, chosen, paid for, and protected by me. And ironically, some of it was indirectly funded by him. That thought alone made the glow of the lights a little sweeter. By then, the $400 had turned into something of a ritual. I no longer saw it as just money. It was a symbol. A monthly reminder that while he had chosen to walk away, he couldn't fully escape the consequences of his choice. Sometimes I'd laugh to myself, imagining him writing the check or hitting send on the transfer, knowing it wasn't for groceries, bills, or family. It was for me, to use however I wanted. And I made sure to enjoy every penny. A weekend spa trip, a new set of designer sheets, a spontaneous dinner at the fancy French restaurant downtown. Each indulgence felt like a private victory, a quiet toast to the life I was building. And yet, beneath all the laughter and satisfaction, there were nights when the silence felt heavier than the joy. Do you know what it's like to share your life with someone for 25 years, only to suddenly sleep alone every night? Sometimes I'd reach out in the dark, half expecting his arm to be there, his steady breathing filling the room. But there was only emptiness. That emptiness hurt. It reminded me that the money was never about making me whole. It was about making sure I never forgot who had broken me in the first place. Still, the ache of loneliness never overpowered the satisfaction of freedom. In fact, it made me stronger. I was learning how to live with the silence, how to embrace it, how to see it not as loneliness but as peace. There's a strange kind of strength that comes from realizing you'd rather be alone and whole than partnered and broken. And that's exactly what I was, whole again, piece by piece. Around Christmas, we ended up in the same room again. Our daughter, Anna, invited us both to our holiday dinner. I hadn't planned on staying long, but when I walked in, I could feel his eyes on me immediately. He looked tired, worn, older somehow, as though leaving hadn't given him the happiness he expected. He avoided my gaze most of the night, but I caught him staring once when I laughed at something Anna said. There was something in his eyes. Not love, not regret exactly, but maybe recognition. Recognition that I was doing just fine without him. Later, as coats were being gathered and goodbyes exchanged, he pulled me aside quietly. "You look good," he said, his voice awkward, almost hesitant. I smiled, a polite, measured smile, the kind you give a stranger on the street. "Thank you," I replied. "Life's been good to me." He nodded, as though he wanted to say more but stopped, because what could he say? That he missed me? That he regretted it? That he envied the glow I carried now? Maybe. Or maybe he just knew that no words could erase what he'd done. That night, as I drove home with soft Christmas carols on the radio, I realized something important. I no longer cared about what he thought. His opinion didn't weigh on me anymore. His presence or absence didn't define me. The money was still coming in, yes, but it wasn't the payments that defined my life now. It was me, my choices, my strength, my laughter, my peace. And in that realization, I found something even better than revenge. I found freedom. Spring rolled in with rain showers and blossoms, and with it came a shift I never saw coming. The $400 was steady, the routine unchanged, but my own perspective began to evolve. I didn't just see it as revenge anymore. I began to see it as leverage. He had once held all the power, dictating our lives, our marriage, our future. But now, with every month that passed, he was the one dependent on me. Isn't it ironic how tables turn so quietly, so completely? One afternoon, I ran into him outside the pharmacy. He looked frazzled, standing in line with a handful of over-the-counter medicine. His eyes darted nervously when he saw me, but I smiled and walked right up. "How's the insurance treating you?" I asked sweetly. The way his jaw tightened told me everything. He hated it. Hated that I had control over something so vital to him. Hated that he had to pay me for what I got for free. But he forced a nod, mumbling, "It's fine." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "Good. I'd hate to think you weren't getting your money's worth." Then I walked away, leaving him to stew in silence. There's a power in being underestimated your whole life, only to rise above. For 25 years, I was the one begging for scraps of love, approval, or even acknowledgement. And now, he was the one clinging to my decisions, waiting every month for me not to pull the plug. Sometimes I'd wonder if he ever lay awake at night thinking about how fragile his little arrangement was. How with one stroke of a pen, one divorce filing, I could cut him off completely. That thought alone kept me warm some nights. But here's the part that surprised me most. The more power I realized I had, the less I wanted to use it out of spite. Don't get me wrong, I loved watching him squirm, loved knowing he was paying for my freedom. But what I loved even more was seeing how much I had changed. I wasn't that woman on the bathroom floor anymore. I wasn't the wife who begged. I wasn't the one who cried herself to sleep wondering why she wasn't enough. I was different now, stronger, sharper, more dangerous maybe, but also freer. Around this time, a friend invited me to a women's retreat up in the mountains. A weekend of hiking, yoga, and late-night fireside talks. At first I hesitated. Old habits whispered, "What if he needs you? What if something goes wrong?" But then I remembered, I didn't owe him anything. So I went. And standing on a cliff overlooking a valley, with the sun rising in streaks of orange and gold, I felt something I hadn't in years, pure peace. I thought, this is mine, this moment, this freedom, this life. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. When I got back, there was another envelope with his payment waiting. I set it on my counter, poured myself a glass of wine, and smiled. It wasn't just money anymore. It was proof. Proof that walking away from who I used to be was the best decision I ever made. Proof that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't shouting, or fighting, or even winning. It's living a life so full, so strong, that the person who left you has no choice but to watch from the sidelines. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. By the time autumn arrived, the leaves weren't the only things changing. I could see the cracks forming in him. He was unraveling, little by little, in ways he probably thought I wouldn't notice. But I noticed everything. His once cocky stride was slower, his voice less steady, his smile forced. And every month when that envelope arrived in my mailbox, it felt heavier. Not with money, but with the weight of his resentment. I knew he hated himself for needing me, but he hated me more for not needing him back. One evening, I got a call from him. His voice was tight, clipped, trying to sound casual but failing. "Do you ever think about just ending this?" he asked. I could almost picture him pacing, running a hand through his thinning hair, filing the papers, cutting ties. I let the silence linger just long enough before replying, "Sometimes." But then I remember it's only $400. That's not too high a price for peace, don't you think? He didn't answer. The line went dead and I smiled, knowing I had struck exactly where it hurt. What fascinated me most was watching the shift in power between us. For 25 years, he had been the one making decisions, the one who walked out when he wanted change. But now, with every dollar he sent me, he was tethered. And the more dependent he became, the more independent I felt. Isn't it funny how the person who leaves often thinks they'll be free, when in reality they just trade one cage for another? Friends began to notice the difference in me. "You look lighter," one said over coffee. "Happier, stronger." I laughed softly, swirling the cup in my hand. Maybe I finally learned how to breathe. And I had. Because for once, my story wasn't about him. It wasn't about saving a marriage, or keeping peace, or begging for love. It was about me, finally choosing myself, finally owning my power. But of course, he couldn't stand that. The more I bloomed, the more he wilted. At family events, I'd hear whispers from mutual friends about how bitter he had become, how he complained about the money, how he called me greedy, how he said I was holding him hostage. Hostage. That word made me laugh. If anything, he had locked himself in chains the moment he chose to walk away. I didn't put him there. He did. One night, I found myself sitting on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The air was crisp, the kind of night that makes you reflect on everything. I thought about who I used to be, about the bathroom floor where I once cried until I couldn't breathe. I thought about the woman who begged, who believed love had to be earned. And then I looked at the glass of wine in my hand, the calm in my chest, and realized that woman was gone. She wasn't coming back. Still, part of me wondered how long he would last like this. How long before he broke completely under the pressure of paying me to stay silent, paying me to hold the divorce papers at bay. Did he lie awake at night thinking about the irony? About how freedom had slipped through his fingers while I held the key? I didn't know. And truthfully, I didn't care. Because my life had become bigger than him, brighter than his shadow. But I'll admit this much. Watching him slowly crumble was a satisfaction I never expected to taste. And with each passing month, I couldn't help but wonder, when the day finally comes, will I be the one to cut him loose? Or will he keep paying, forever chained by the choices he made? Winter crept in slowly, and with it came the final unraveling. He called me one evening, his voice broken, nothing like the man who once stood tall and confident in our living room as he packed his bags to leave. "I can't keep doing this," he whispered. "Every month feels like I'm paying penance, like I'm trapped." I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the heater filling the silence, and let him stew in it. "Then stop," I said simply. "The form is only $60. File it. Be free." My words cut like ice because we both knew the truth. Freedom was something he couldn't afford. By then, the money I collected each month wasn't just a petty victory anymore. It had transformed into a symbol, a reminder that I was no longer the woman on the bathroom floor begging him to stay. I was the woman he now begged for relief, and I savored every second of that reversal. Have you ever tasted justice that sweet? Not the kind handed down in a courtroom, but the kind you carve out yourself, one decision at a time. At work, I thrived. My new job was more than just a paycheck. It was proof that life after betrayal could be bigger, fuller, more powerful than before. I led meetings with confidence, closed deals with clients who respected me, and built friendships that reminded me I wasn't invisible. Every success added bricks to the wall between us, a wall he could never climb. And with each milestone, I could feel the old version of me, the one he discarded, fade further into the past. He, on the other hand, shrank. Mutual friends whispered that he looked older, worn down, like he carried a weight that never lifted. Some nights I imagined him staring at the divorce papers he never filed, wondering if today would be the day. But then the calendar would flip, the payment would arrive, and I'd smile, knowing he'd chosen once again to chain himself rather than let me walk away completely. The ultimate irony? His payments had given me freedom he thought I'd never find. I booked my first trip abroad with that money, a ticket to Spain, a dream I had once shelved during our marriage because he said we couldn't afford it. As I stood on the cobblestone streets of Barcelona, breathing in the scent of roasted chestnuts and listening to street musicians play under the stars, I realized something powerful. He hadn't just left me. He had set me free, even if he didn't mean to. When I returned home, the cycle continued. He still paid. I still accepted. And I knew deep down that he hated himself for it. But that was no longer my problem. For once, his choices were his burden to carry. Mine was to live fully, unapologetically, and on my own terms. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself wondering how long it would last. Would he pay me for years? Decades? Or would there come a day when he finally snapped, finally chose to sever the last thread binding us together? Either way, the story had already been rewritten. He left me, thinking I'd crumble. Instead, I rose higher than I ever thought possible. And he, the man who thought he held all the power, now pays me every single month for the privilege of my silence. That's the thing about revenge. It doesn't always come with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's as simple as a check arriving in the mail, month after month, reminding him that the woman he threw away is the one who ended up winning. When I look back now, it almost feels like I'm watching someone else's life. The woman I used to be, the one curled up on the bathroom floor, sobbing into a towel so no one would hear, she doesn't exist anymore. She died the day I realized I didn't have to beg for love or validation. She died when he left, thinking I'd crumble, and instead I built something stronger from the pieces he broke. Isn't it strange how sometimes the end we fear the most becomes the beginning we never knew we needed? Every month when his payment arrives, it doesn't feel like just money. It feels like a reminder that I took the pain he gave me and turned it into power. That the man who thought he could walk away without consequence now carries the weight of his own choices. And it feels poetic, doesn't it? To know that the woman he thought he'd left behind is the one writing the ending to his story. But this isn't really about him anymore. It's about me. It's about standing tall when no one expects you to. It's about learning that silence can be louder than screams, and that sometimes the quietest revenge leaves the deepest scars. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I stopped hoping for love that was never real. And I started living, for myself, on my terms, without fear of who I'd be without him. And the truth? I'm better than I've ever been. Maybe you felt that same ache, the sting of betrayal, the weight of rejection, the hollow silence where love used to be. Maybe you've been left behind, forgotten, underestimated. If you have, then I hope my story shows you one thing. You are stronger than the pain. You can take the worst day of your life and use it as fuel to build the life you deserve. And trust me, there is no greater revenge than finding peace where they expected you to shatter. This was my journey, but it could be yours too. If my story spoke to you, if you felt even a piece of yourself in these words, then stay with me here on Revenge Inside. Subscribe to hear more stories of strength, betrayal, and justice. Like this video if you believe in finding power after heartbreak. And share it, because you never know who else might need to hear that they're not alone. Revenge doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's steady. And sometimes it's just as simple as a reminder that the one who was left behind is the one who walked away stronger.